My name is Eliana Elias. I work in the Bay Area. When people ask me, what do you do? I say a little bit of everything. I worked with preschool children in a lab school setting for years, and after that, I started working with teachers as a coach and instructor, and really studying the way that the environment influences children. That's one of my interests. I have some other interests too, but we're going to be focusing our time together today in the picking of materials and what we can offer children. I'm so excited that I was here for the talk with Ellen Galinsky because I've been studying her work, and so much of what she was talking about in terms of development of focus we can do through the environment. So I hope that you feel excited about being here today. There are some things that you will see in front of you. Try to restrain yourself from playing with them. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead and play with them. And there's some people, there's room here. There are two chairs over here. Welcome. And in the back tables, there's a couple more invitations there and a yellow sheet with resources for you, some of the resources that we'll be talking about, because on your handout, the resource list was so small, but you can grab that on your way out. We're going to start, and since it's after lunch, this is a time where a lot of people have a hard time focusing. So we're going to start by letting you take a little bit of a nap. But it's a thoughtful nap. Let's find one more place for you. Yeah, there's room over here. Come and sit with us. So you've all met Hetty. She's going to help me do some storytelling for you today, okay? Ready?
Should I start the slideshow?
Yes, please. Oh, one more announcement. You will see that we have microphones. We're being filmed from the back. When you have a question or a comment, it's really important to speak clearly into that microphone. The room is small, but if you don't, they're not going to be able to capture it for the video, okay?
And I'll have the mic. I'll be passing it around as you raise your hands.
Thank you. Children are miracles.
How do teachers make decisions on behalf of the miracles that children are? What values guide your decision making?
What if we planned our environments to welcome a miracle?
Planned our environments to engage children's active minds and bodies.
What if we decided to offer children countless ways to relate to the natural world?
Each day, children present us with decisions to make. For instance, what if we put a material in a new place? Would a child's interest grow?
What if we used brain research to inform our decisions about what to offer children?
Our daily decisions reflect our values and either strengthen or limit possibilities for children.
Beyond decorating, why are beauty and aesthetics important to our thinking as educators?
Alison Gopnik's research suggests children see more, hear more, feel more, and experience more than adults do. They are far better learners than we are.
If children's brains make them actually more conscious than adults, what does this suggest about how we plan for them?
What actions can we take to extend and deepen their learning?
Our choice of materials influences how we see children, and therefore, how we teach.
Do we offer materials that invite investigation and engage children's minds?
How do we provide for big body movements to develop children's brains?
What if we see ourselves as protectors of childhood?
When we document, we show evidence of decision-making on behalf of both the children learning and our own.
What can we learn about children as we observe them interact with materials?
How does our documentation shape children's identity? How does it invite deeper relationships, questions, and discoveries?
What can teachers do to uncover children's stories and see their perspectives?
How can we understand children's ideas and what they are trying to accomplish?
Do we really see the details of what engages children?
When we choose open-ended materials for our environments, we promote children's executive functioning, their initiative, imagination, and problem-solving skills.
All of our daily decisions can get children ready for school.
What if we thought more deeply about school readiness? What does it really mean?
What if we saw our daily work with children as furthering democracy and equity in the world?
The educators of Reggio Emilia remind us we must not assess what the child knows or knows how to do, but what he or she could do if. We are the if.
What values guide you as you prepare your environments to welcome the children and their families?
I love this slideshow. It was put together by my colleague and friend, Deb Curtis. And when we do this together, it's really hard for both of us to stand still. She's from Italian descent and I'm Brazilian. So you saw evidence of my body language there when I hit the mic. What are some of your feelings about what you just saw?
I was just thinking that, I only have so much control over what my environment looks like. Part of it is funding, obviously, but part of it is just understanding why it looks or should look like I want it to look.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So if site council or, admin or whether it's your site or upper, they need to understand that there's a thought that went into this. It's not just I felt like playing in sand that day.
Right. So it falls, yeah.
I saw also quality and beauty.
Mm-hmm.
The best, showing the best of the environment, things that are very fine and beautiful.
Right.
Right behind you.
Okay. I like the way that it acknowledged nature, because I think that's a right direction where the children can start admiring it more.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the environments were lovely, just interesting and exciting. And I've started doing environments in my own classroom, which is way more interesting and exciting than just having the primary colors and everything looking so beautiful on my boards, which I've always prided myself for many years. And now I have a little messy nature center. And I saw some different ones at a little wood center where they can cut, and they love it way more. It's not quite as pretty in the old days, but those were beautiful.
Yeah. We'll take one more comment about this slideshow and then.
I love the protectors of childhood.
Yeah. We'll be talking a little about that. Our job is much bigger than we even realize. I think. So thank you for that. We will be diving into some of the principles behind this idea. Just in response, what's your name? Back there you talked about having control over the environment, and Faye. We'll be talking a lot about why is it important, and it's not just because we want to make it pretty. Okay? So thank you for being with me and not falling asleep on me, especially after lunch. So how do I make this work, Hetty? Do you know? This little thingy? Oh, I figured it out. Okay. So I want you to turn to a person next to you and start by talking a little bit about, we talked about this, about the memories of your own childhood. Revisit your childhood right about kindergarten and think about your favorite place to be. And spend about 2 minutes talking to the person next to you. What qualities do you remember from that place? What were the adults doing? Were they going behind you saying, "Be safe, walking feet"? You know. What were they doing? And think about that space. Think about the smells, the tastes, the sounds that you could hear, and extract some of those qualities. But talk to your partner about that place, those memories that you have. All right. Okay. I know there's, when we open the floodgates of memory, it's so much fun, right, to think about our own childhood memories. I propose that our childhood memories should be a guide for us to also plan curriculum. Because sometimes we forget how fun it was to get our hands full of mud and things like that, right? Some people winced. I loved mud when I was a kid, so I get it. But some people might have loved something else. So what are some of the places that you remember, and what are some of the qualities of that place, the attributes of that place? We'll take about 5 or 6 comments.
The freedom of...
Just 1 second while you can, because we really want to hear.
I'll use my teacher voice. Yes. No, for me, and I was sharing with my friends here, and I didn't get their name because we forgot to introduce ourselves. We just delved right into it. I think for me, what stands out as a memory is my playground in particular, and the freedom that all children had to go to the painting easels, and that there was this painting easel station where you shared the playground with something like 60 maybe kindergartners at one time, and there was probably it had probably 6 easels, like double-sided, so 12 kids could gravitate, and it was about watching people represent their world, the kids, and that's how I learned to paint a tree, like my friend. And I just felt Yvonne just did the best trees in the world, and I would try to emulate that every single day. And so I don't know how many trees I must have painted, but a painting center, and that I think is very, very important. For a child to have that creative space, yes. To learn something. Just
yes.
I'm really excited to tell this story.
Oh, great.
In my kindergarten class, we had these building blocks, giant wooden ones, and they were lifted vertically, and several of them in a circle, and these long planks across each one.
Pause.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Historically, that was done by Carolyn Pratt, the inventor of the unit blocks. And unfortunately, they don't sell them anymore. It's a fabulous, fabulous material. Yeah.
Well, I have a photo of us as children on our hands and knees going around this circle 3 feet off the ground. And just imagining that in my classroom, it feels a little daunting. But thinking of me as a child, I remember that hand in front of the other, knees, and just balancing and feeling this sense of, worry and fear, but I'm going to go for it feeling, and reminding that sense of danger that kids need that to kind of figure stuff out. Yeah. So,
and in some communities, like one of
That's
my fun jobs is I lead study tours to New Zealand, and they have a whole different approach to risk taking. They talk about risk management. And the kinds of things that you see the children doing there stopped even my heart, and I'm very adventurous. So, pretty great story, thank you. So the idea of risk-taking or risk management, how are we providing that idea for children that stays in our memory? Yeah. I saw a hand up on this side of the room.
Mine was climbing to a top of a tree. It was pretty high. It was probably 15 feet, and I used to hang there for a long time. And probably because I could be by myself and nobody else was going to bother me. And I don't remember my mom ever telling me, don't do that. Like, you're going to crack your head open, you're going to fall. Just didn't occur to her. Didn't occur to me.
We'll come back to that image of kids climbing a tree. Okay. Any other comment? No? All right. Oh, go ahead.
So when I was in kindergarten a long time ago, we had to take naps. And so when we were taking naps, the lights would be down low and it'd be very quiet. And we were all supposed to be sleeping, but there were some ants that used to walk by, and I won't tell them what I did to the ants, but I used to watch the ants and see the patterns that they made, and just kind of see what they did, and that was really interesting. So that's what I did.
Great story. Yes, things that are completely missed by the adults, right? Well, I love revisiting those memories because they provide a canvas for us to kind of think about the experiences we are providing the children now. I often joke with the teachers I work with that, and for instance, that for me, one of my memories is the smell, the fresh smell of herbs in my playground. I love that. And apparently the sense of smell provides you with very strong memories. I don't know if you guys have experienced that. And I often joke that for our kids, it'll be the smell of bleach, because that's all they're smelling these days, right? So we need to really think about this. So let's look at the agenda. So we're going to be talking a little bit about designing environments with the brain research in mind. When I started teaching years ago, I won't tell you when, we didn't have much brain research back then. Brain research really became more available to us in the 90s. And now we know so much more. Today, Ellen Galinsky talked a lot about research that is out there and available to us and how we can translate it into the principles that we can use in the classroom. But way back when some of us were trained, that research was not available. But we had good instincts. The early childhood folks always had great instincts about what to offer children. So we'll be revisiting that. We're going to talk a little bit about the principles of design. I had to choose some. They're not all the principles that exist, but I'll leave you with some resources if you want to do your own research on designing environments for young children. And then we're going to talk a little bit about creating invitations and provocations, because there is the big environment where you have to think about accessibility and wheelchair paths and what do you put next to what. If the bathroom is over there, perhaps you can't have something that will get ruined with water. So you have to think about that macro level, and then thinking about the very small pieces of your classroom. And what I always tell teachers is you don't have to do it all at once. You can start with one little corner of your room and be very intentional, like someone mentioned, creating a nature area. And then you can start spreading these principles to other areas of your classroom. Integrated into the content this afternoon, we're going to be talking a little bit about developmentally appropriate practices, strategies for engaging families, a little bit about what's beneficial to our dual language learners. How many of you have dual language learners in your classroom? Almost all of you, yeah. And children with special rights. We're going to share some resources throughout the presentation, and then don't try to write everything down because your list of resources is in the back. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the frameworks. How many of you use ECers in your classroom? Do you have to use ECers? Oh, and that, in some ways, that's good. And the TK implementation guide. I'm sure you all know this back and forth. There is actually a lot about environments there. And also the NAYC guidelines and class, all of that will be integrated in as much as possible. Let's think about the brain and designing with the brain in mind. What do you know about children's growing brains? What are some of the things that you know?
The first 5 years are the most important.
Why?
They grow the most in the first 5 years.
Yes. We even had some numbers today. I couldn't catch it, but it was like something like astronomical, right? That there is connections being made every millisecond, right? What else do you know about children's brains?
They need opportunities to research mouth, taste, touch. They need to be able to feel their environment.
They need to be able to feel the environment. The things that drive us crazy are the things they need to do. Like, I don't know about you guys, but give a baby a banana, the last thing they're going to do is eat it, right? They're going to explore it, smell it, smear it. So any other addition of anything else that you know about the brain?
The brain's very plastic, very flexible.
The brain is super plastic, means that even as adults, we can change our brain. Harder, but the brain is very plastic. It means that it changes. And every child is able to change the connections in their brain. It really is dependent on us. I like what Galinsky had to say today about the nurture versus nature dilemma, that it's not one or the other, it's both together. So it's really important to remember those things. I've been studying Alison Gopnik's work very closely. She lives in Berkeley. So I always like to think of myself as a close friend, although she does not know who I am. So I've been studying her work very closely because I think it's very applicable to early childhood educators. The last book she wrote, The Gardener and the Carpenter, is really directed at families, at parents, but I think it's very applicable to teachers, to early childhood teachers as well. And it's this idea that instead of acting like carpenters, that we think we can shape how children are going to leave. They're going to leave ready for school. They're going to know these things. That we think more as gardeners. That our job is to create a good soil, to plant the seeds, but we don't quite necessarily what's going to happen. And we are there to support it, water it, give it nutrition, but we don't know necessarily how it's going to turn out. And that's really important. Now, we talk a lot about why play is important, right? We know that it helps children learn, blah, blah, blah. But one piece that I was missing in my research that was highlighted by Gopnik's research is that play is important not just on an individual level, but for our species. So when somebody said, I like this idea of being protector of childhood, I got excited because we are the protectors of our research days. We have, as humans, a long time to play, right? We are playful. Actually, we can play for the rest of our lives. You should see me with my girlfriends when we are out. We know how to play. But When we are 0 through 10, or even a little bit older than that, kids are masters in play. And there is a reason, and it's not just an individual reason, but it's the time when we as human beings are researching the world and researching possibilities. So on an evolutionary, on a perspective, from an evolutionary perspective, we need those years to discover what's possible, okay? So there is a great analogy that if the human species were a corporation, children would be our research and development department. So if you give children a bucket, like Galinsky had an exercise, right, that she was going to let us do but didn't have time, showed us a picture of a coffee can and asked us, you know, if we had time. So if we were given that, we would probably find 5, 6 ways to use it. But give that to a 3-year-old, and they will find so many ways to use it. Climb on it, walk on it, roll it. So we are designed as humans to have possibilities, to seek out possibilities. And that gives us the base for the development of culture, of new ideas, of creating things that weren't there before. And it's all really well explained in Gopnik's work, how important that is. And how is that applied to our work with very young children? We'll be talking about that throughout this presentation. So here's some of the classrooms we offer, right? These are some of the environments that people put so much work into creating. Here's another one. Nothing wrong with it, but let's think about the brain, what we're talking about, children's brain, and think about these environments. Just take it in. So here's some of the issues that I see. If we're talking about children's brain being so different than ours, that they are almost a different species, that they see more, they smell more, they focus on even the little ants that are going by. And then we offer things like this. What are some of the issues, right? I've identified 3. It's very cluttered. It's very generic. You could find it the same classroom in Idaho or in San Francisco, where I work a lot. And it's quite institutional. Lakeshore is making a lot of money on us. So here's what the research says about cluttered environments. Can somebody read that for me from back there?
Multiple stimuli. Okay, multiple stimuli present in the visual field at the same time compete for neural representation by mutually suppressing their evoked activity throughout visual cortex, providing a neural correlate for the limited processing capacity of the visual system.
What the hell does that mean, right? Let's do it in English.
Well, I can tell you.
Can
what
you
that
do
means.
it in English now, please?
Well, I mean, I could just sort of just give you an example. I mean, I walk into some classrooms or into some people's homes and think about how clutter affects you, how hoarding affects you. And I think that in many ways, as teachers, we become hoarders and we begin to acquire everybody's hand-me-downs, our very own new things that we're purchasing, and we don't have enough space to put it or to store it. And when I walk into a cluttered classroom, I just want to leave. When I walk into some of my siblings' homes, I just want to leave because it doesn't make me feel good at all.
Yeah. And I have to say, it doesn't affect everybody the same way, right? So I feel the same way as you do. I feel like there's some friends' houses when they invite me for dinner, I go, oh God, I hope we're sitting outside. Yeah. So this is the translation that I came up with, which is similar, right? Can somebody read this one for me?
When our environment is cluttered, the chaos restricts our ability to focus. The clutter also limits our brain's ability to process information. Clutter makes us distracted and...
Now throw that, so you have children that are developing, but throw in a kid with ADHD. Or throw in a kid with language processing disorders, or a kid who has to learn English on top of it all, right? So we're adding these layers of complexity to environments that are really cluttered. Yes? Go ahead and speak into my mic.
Oh, no, I got it. So for me personally, and at least in our district, I don't know how many of you share classrooms with kinder and stuff. So for me, it's so difficult because especially coming from, preschool background, we know how important environment is and how much a clean, nice, organized classroom is. But what's difficult is when you're sharing that space with someone else and they maybe don't have the same beliefs, or, they've been there a lot longer than you and they have a lot more things, and their personal teaching style maybe isn't your own. And so that's what I've been struggling with the past few years.
Yeah,
so
no, it's
I don't know
hard.
if anyone else feels me on that. So.
It is hard. It is hard. And how many of you come from Montessori backgrounds? So for the Montessori folks, they already know historically Montessori gave us a great contribution. She already came up with some of these ideas way before brain research was out there available to us. She really believed that a well-organized environment promoted learning, and I think she was really on the right track. So we're going to move on to this second issue that I mentioned, that it's very generic. It's the unintended consequences of the ECers, for me in the early childhood world, is that every classroom is looking the same. I don't know if you are familiar with the ECers. I had to be trained in it. But for each child in your room, you have to have 3 pieces of artwork shown. And if you have 24 children, do the math. So a lot of those little requirements make the classroom full of stuff, right? And granted, there are some good things about the ECers. I really feel like it really promoted a one-size-fits-all sort of environment across the nation. And then there's lack of representation of the children themselves and their families. Even though they do have one item that says, is there pictures of the children there? But there is so much more other things that they require that kind of seems to be drowned out. There's very low aesthetic value, in my view. And then there's a disconnect from the natural world, right? Because we end up buying so many things. How many of you have teddy bear counters? I swear those things reproduce at night. I'm serious. They are in every classroom I go, and everywhere you turn, there is one of those. And I'm thinking, why? Why can't we count something else, right? For instance, natural things that you find with your kids. And then the last one of those issues is the idea of the institutional environments, that teachers have less ownership of their classroom, that corporations have more ownership of your classroom than you do, in a way. And it's not comfortable or comforting to walk into a place that doesn't belong to you, right? And we create this disposable and materialistic mentality. Did you have a chance to see all the materials that I put on your tables? Guess how much I spent with these materials? All of them. No, then you went too low. I spent $100. And I propose that you can outfit your whole classroom with secondhand store purchases or donations or things that you have in your garage, right? And we are throwing away so much, you know, and there is a huge issue with taking care of the earth if we keep buying all this stuff. I know probably Kaplan, is the Kaplan representative here? I hope he's not listening to what I'm saying. And it's driven by the education industry, right? You have to have this, you have to have that. If you really want the children to learn, buy this. And it's not place-based. Have you ever heard this expression before, place-based? Do you know who Sobel is? He wrote this fabulous book called A Place-Based Education, where he proposes that we ought to start with the children's communities. How many of you intentionally know the community you teach? Like you know where the grocery store is, you know, excellent, great. So a place-based education comes from this idea that we study first our city, our place, our backyards. There is an author that wrote The Last Child in the Woods. Do you know him? What's his last name? Louvre? Starts with an L, Louvre. He talks about children knowing more about the names of the dinosaurs than the bugs that are in their backyard. Or that the fact that the children can identify different kinds of cars, but can't identify the plants that grow in the playground in their school. So genetic classrooms and institutional environments do not promote this idea that we care about our environment and our place in the earth. When I went to New Zealand for the first time, I cried so much the first time that the Maori children introduced themselves. And I couldn't even explain why I was crying. It was so joyful, it was so beautiful. But the children are taught to introduce themselves by first saying their name, the name of their tribe, their mountain and their river. And I kept seeing, I think later on I thought, if I were asked what's my mountain and what's my river, I wouldn't know what to choose or what to say, right? So I really have been learning a lot about the power of really supporting children to connect to their earth. If we're going to care for this planet, we need to really help them connect to this planet, to first their community, right? So that they can really take care of it first. So how do we find the inspiration to start changing a little bit here and there, even with all these barriers that we already know? And I won't even pause to name them all. But we do have barriers. But where do we find the inspiration? A lot of people have found inspiration in the work of the educators in Reggio Emilia. And if you are not familiar with Reggio Emilia, I highly recommend you read a little bit about it. How many of you have never heard of Reggio Emilia? Okay, I'll talk a little bit about it. It's a small town in Italy that decided in the 1930s after the war that they would never want to see fascism rise again. So they got together, and this is an initiative by the families, to create wonderful schools that promoted critical thinking so that children really knew how to make choices and how to create a better democracy. And they became famous for their beautiful environment, but there's many other pieces of inspiration in there. And I had the privilege to go there when they weren't big yet. I think it was like 94 when I went. And the first time that I walked into a class, into a school, the kids were having lunch. And again, I cried. I cry a lot. Because the kids were sitting in tables with tablecloths, with real dishes, with real forks and knives, eating a hot meal. I was in charge of lunch at my school at that time, and we did it in 15 minutes on a table, soggy lunch boxes, you know, really like, almost like, okay, eat and let's do something else more important, which is sad. So I changed I couldn't do the tablecloths every day, but we had what we called Fancy Fridays, where we had real napkins and real tablecloths. And so that inspiration is really powerful. And they have lots of resources, both online and lots of wonderful books. One of the oldest and most famous one is 100 Languages of Children. And that's not listed there, and I highly recommend it. Also, the work of my colleagues and friends, Margie Carter and Deb Curtis. They wrote a fabulous book called Designs for Living and Learning, which has inspired me to even change the birthday parties that I offered when my children were little. I mean, that book is unbelievable. And people tend to just look at the pictures. I really want to encourage you to read the text, because it really changed the way I view design and how I provide environments for children. My trips to New Zealand have also inspired me and have inspired a lot of people. If you want to come with me, we're planning one for next year in March. My email is there. I forgot just to bring flyers for you, but write to me and we'll go. And in New Zealand, the most inspiring thing for me is their idea of risk management. And their outdoor spaces are absolutely wonderful and natural. And talk about place-based education. They really know how to do it. And also, I find inspiration in beautiful places, museums, natural environments, native cultures, stores sometimes. You know how you have your favorite stores, the way they place things. Sound funny, but I get a lot of free stuff from stores. I tell them, when you're done with this display, can you give that to me? Oh yeah, really. It's good to get to know the people in your community. So this is the book I was mentioning to you that if there's any book that will get you started, this is a good one to have. So now compare some of these images with classrooms that have applied design principles. And tell me what you think. Compare this to this. And what are some of your thoughts? Colors. Calm. Do you want to sit down? Okay. Yeah. Simple, right? So let's go through the design principles that help teachers create things. And for disclosure, I want to tell you, I was awful at setting up environments when I first started. I was a kid who grew up in a very small town in Brazil. I hadn't been to a museum until I was 17. There was no, my house was very plain, but I had a lot of access to the natural world. And when I came to the US to do my master's program, I was placed in a classroom with this woman who is still my mentor and friend. And I was the kind of teacher that would leave stuff sitting around, piles everywhere. And she would say, please stop doing that. And I thought she was just like a pain. Until one day she sat with me and told me, this is why we need to really take better care of this place. And since then I became a fanatic, right? So it wasn't something that came natural to me. I had to learn. And that's why when people say, oh, you're so artistic, I go, no, I'm not. I learned. And so that means that growth mindset that Carol Dweck talks so much about, we should all have it, because if I learned, you can learn, because I really was awful at it. But here are some design principles that helped me, and I'm offering them to you in the hopes that it might help you. And some of you might already be really good at it. One of the ones that I've learned is the idea of highlighting your community, okay? So give me some sense of where you're from. Just pop it up. Where are you from? Mexico? No, but your community where you're teaching now. Fresno, Castro Valley, Palo Alto.
Oceanside.
East Palo Alto.
Oceanside.
Oceanside, very different, yeah. By the way, when I was an exchange student, I lived very close to, between Fresno and Bakersfield. So I used to go to Fresno for the big city experience. Woohoo! Going to Fresno! So every community here is different. So your classrooms should look different, should reflect your community, right? So here's a community where I teach. I work a lot in the Mission in San Francisco. So when I walked into one of these beautiful, beautiful buildings in the Mission 4 years ago, and I saw nothing of the Mission in there. It was all lakeshore and stuff like that. I asked the director, I just asked the open-ended question, how can we make this place look a little more like the Mission? And she looked at me and said, I never thought of that. So now you go there and it feels like the Mission. There are wonderful murals and local artists that came and worked with the children. But here's some little things that we did. Instead of just having the little house there, we went around and photographed all the murals that the children see on the way to school and put them by the house, and the kids can Velcro them to the wall. Little things like that resembles their environment. So there are many strategies like this that we can do. And here are some kids playing with things that belong kind of in the Mission, right? Sort of tapestries and the rug we bought nearby and things like that. So here's some other examples of how might we create that sense of place throughout the environment. So through pictures, obviously, how many of you use pictures of your families in your classroom? Great. So pictures of families is a great strategy. Pictures of your own community. Another strategy that has made a lot of money for Lakeshore is these kits on diversity, right? You buy them, and very often it's so the antithesis of what children's understanding of diversity is, because some of those images are quite traditional or quite, how can I say, old-fashioned. So I grew up in Brazil. If I saw somebody wearing a pineapple on her head, it would speak nothing to me. I don't see that in my neighborhood. I don't see that where I grew up. Right. So using pictures of your own families and your own children might be a better starting point for children to understand diversity. Not to say that we shouldn't be thoughtful about, for instance, the children's books that we pick and some other images that we pick to present children with an array of expression and culture, but being careful about underestimating the power of the images of our own communities. A sense of place through exploration. I always say if your curriculum included going on walks, that would be awesome. In fact, the woman that I mentioned, Carolyn Pratt, who, by the way, already passed away years ago, who created the unit blocks, she used to have every Friday was exploration, where you would go to the docks. By the way, her school is in New York, and the children would take little clipboards and study their community. A sense of place through caring for animals and plants. So having plants and live things in your classroom. A sense of place through the honoring of the families and their background. And I always say, talking to the families, gaining information from them, bringing elements of their own homes into your classroom is such a powerful thing. Any questions so far? No? This is another resource that I really like. It's the idea of the use of colors. Some of you picked up on that idea that a lot of our classrooms currently are full of primary colors. I am not sure where that idea came from, that primary colors are connected to children. or to childhood. And I would propose to you that if I presented these two materials side by side, and I did this on purpose, when you have a chance at the end, come and see a Play-Doh setup that uses real materials and a play setup with plastic primary color materials. Which materials do you think the kids would gravitate to? Definitely this. So I'm not sure where it came from that one day somebody in the marketing world said, primary colors, children, they love that. When we know that it really isn't the case. And when I often tell teachers, we have to have a really mute palette in the classroom because the children will bring the colors, right? Their outfits, often people are concerned that it will be too boring, right? It'll be too boring. I'm like, you can use other colors, you can use other palettes, but be intentional about it. Another element, another principle is the idea of increasing flexibility in the way we use space and materials. Materials that only have one purpose will trap you, that you can only use them a certain way. So let's think of furniture, for instance. Some companies sell what's called a reading booth or a library. It's this box, basically, that you can't use as anything else, basically. And that occupies a lot of space, and it's a one-way, one type of material. Around this picture, you can see a lot of different things. Can I do this? Yeah. See a lot of different things that can change, right? Doesn't even look like a classroom, does it? But it can be a building platform. We can bring this down here. It's kind of platforms with holes that can serve in so many ways for the study of physics, with ramps, bunch of baskets that can be filled with different materials. You can change this in many, many ways. You can pull the rug and make a messy area out here. Anyway, you can do a lot of different things with these materials, right? Another one is this idea of providing open-ended materials. Somebody mentioned open-ended materials here. Who did? There is actually a book that was written by a woman in the Sacramento area called Loose Parts. Yes. Do you know that book? Do you want to talk about it? Coffee table, no. Yeah. It's an excellent book because it will give you, again, it's awesome to look at the pictures, and sometimes people flip through the pictures but don't read the text. I highly recommend reading the text because it talks about the research behind loose parts and how that is so important for children. Because you're not telling them how to use those materials, they can find so many different ways, and you can present them. Your power is how you decide to present those materials to children too. So you will see that in a lot of my invitations, I use corks. That says a lot about where I get them, right? But those are so flexible. So you can glue them, you can roll them, you can do experiments with them, you can build with them, you can do tons of different things. So presenting loose parts in combination with traditional materials, you see a baby there. You see babies here, but you see a lot of different things. So kids have to use and exercise their imagination to create things for that baby. So you'd be amazed how those little logs there become bottles, become telephones, become so many different things. And that's the basis for abstract thinking, right? We want children to be pretending and thinking of pretend in a different way. Galinsky talked about pretend play today. How many of you caught what she had to say about it? Right? The pretend play is much more important than we think, because it's the basis for abstract thinking and for so many other things, particularly literacy. Because we decided as humans that we're going to have those squiggly marks on the paper, and we decided that they were going to mean something. So if your brain is used to pretending that something is something else, it'll be much easier for you to agree to pretend that the letters C-A-T spells cat and means cat. Okay, so pretending is so important. Somebody had their hand up.
I'm noticing the, I don't have to use my teacher voice. I'm noticing the environment, it's flexible, right? As far as having a environment that has words all around the room, that's been the focus from many, many teachers and learning that from many different places. So in these environments, they don't have anything labeled. So as far as, is that the philosophy that nothing is labeled with words?
I'm in between. I label some things. And I label things when it's meaningful to children. I don't like to plaster classrooms with stuff just because we think. But when we connect children to meaningful literacy experiences, I really think the labels can be meaningful. So instead of just saying blocks, have the children make the label with you, or have some signs or some sentences that the children created together. I brought a literacy invitation back there, and the words are still in my bag, but I had a little invitation, for instance, to write cards for mommy, daddy, grandma, but things that make sense to children, right? Because again, we know that literacy is important to children only when there is a function, right? So plastering the classroom with words, just like that first quote that you read from back there, what do I pay attention to if I'm 5 and I'm still trying to know the letters and everything is on the wall? So oftentimes by the end of the year, so much went up and nothing came down that kids begin to block it out. So how do we make those labels or those words stand out for children? Sometimes I've seen this from these brilliant teachers. Sometimes they have these rings with children's words, their words in it, or by the literacy area having lots of words in a basket with symbols next to them so that they can do their own writing themselves. The other day I saw this 4-year-old labor through, please save this for Connor. You know, because he needed to make a sign, and the teacher brilliantly said, go make a sign, you know, and he had everything he needed there. So it's this idea of making everything meaningful. So again, open-ended, beautiful materials that can be a million things, not just teddy bears, but this can be counters, this can be pretend play, this can be food in the pretend play area, these can be a lot of different things. Another strategy that I find that it's really, really important, how long is your day in TK? For some of you, it's all day, right? So I often ask adults, and it's fun, right? We always say, oh, it's fun, it's really fun. I often ask a group of adults, how many of you would like to go to a party every day from 8 to 3? And you have to share, and you have to talk, and you have to be polite, and you have to be friendly. And if people ask you to sit next to you, even if you don't like them, you have to say yes. How would that feel for you? So when Galinsky was talking about focus and how that is important, and she started talking about all those games, I got a little bit nervous. Because the last thing we want is to create more crazy children by playing games to focus them, right? We need to create places where children know when they need a break. Right? And those rare ones that don't, we can tell them, hey, how about reading a book? There is a cozy spot for you, this way. So it's it's so important for all children to have that little spot to go and relax for a little bit before you can go into the next thing. But it's particularly important for our dual language learners. When I came to this country, I was 17, I didn't speak a word of English. I remember being so exhausted by the end of the day that I couldn't speak either language anymore. It's really exhausting. So having a corner or a little place where you can go be by yourself or listen to a story in your own language or perhaps play with one friend is really, really important. So here's some examples. It doesn't need to be fancy. Here's just, can you see from over there? And here is a quote from one of my favorite early childhood people who already passed away, Anita Oates. Does anybody know her? She's from California. When children feel comfortable in their physical surroundings, they will venture to explore materials or events around them. So a little mental break can prepare children for the next step. So creating these little places or quiet times where you play with one person, you know, or having the lighting be a little different. For instance, this kind of lighting is a lethal weapon for those ADHD children. So turning off the lights, creating just that makes a huge difference. And don't forget you, right? If you're like me, I can't sit on the floor all day anymore, you know. So creating those spaces for adults too, where you can take a little break and sit, or parents can come and sit for a minute and read to children. So think about the adults as well. Another concept that we talk a lot about is the idea of creating complexity and beauty. So oftentimes we think we need to chew things down for children and make it simple, when in fact they like it when it's layered with complexity, right? So this is a simple but yet complex way of checking in the beginning of the school year. Instead of writing your name, which some of them are still not able to, they have to pick the rock that has their name on it and put it in the basket. That's a counting activity. It's beautiful, it's fun. There's a lot of different layers to it. Another example is the idea of adding shadow and light into different environments where children can experiment with that. That's a much more complex level of study than just playing with the blocks. This is an invitation from one of my classrooms where a teacher just put out these beautiful herbs that were found in the classroom. And you can't see it from the picture, but over on this corner here, she had a book about herbs. And kids could go back to the book, and it was literacy, but it was also using their senses and allowing them to explore this much more complex science corner. Do you know who Betsy Fox is? Did some of you go to her presentation this morning? She and I joke that every science corner there's a pine cone. It's like, can't we find some other things besides pine cones? And so this is another suggestion of how you can create these experiences for children. Integrating learning goals. We don't have to just have building be here and nothing about literacy, or this corner is just math and nothing about language development. That we can integrate those learning goals, because as we know, children don't learn in these compartmentalized ways. That they learn about the world in a much more holistic way, right? So in this invitation, for instance, it's art, but it's also literacy, it's also science. Right? Same thing up here. There is science, there is physics, there is all kinds of learning goals integrated there. Encouraging autonomy throughout the classroom, and this is something we already knew about way before the elementary school teachers knew about, that we need to offer children the opportunity to go find their own materials, to get it off the shelves, to use it themselves, and put it back. But then teachers say, oh, but my kids are not taking care of the environment. We need to create curriculum that supports a system of caring. So for instance, every Friday in my classroom, we had teams cleaning the room. This team was in charge of the blocks, this team was in charge of whatever, and the kids knew where everything went, and they had, you know, cleaning supplies. It was like a little, you know, barn raising event. It was really fun. Sure.
This year I added a changing table, like one of the basic changing tables, a little wooden one, to my classroom because I was reading on the community aspect of everybody knows where crayons are and all that. And so all of it's on this white changing table. I didn't even paint it. I just left it how it was. I got it for $5 at a yard sale. And all of our broken crayons go in one bin on it. All of our new crayons go in it. So if someone breaks one, they know where to find it. They'll go get it for their friend. And everybody takes care of our stuff because it's all in one spot for them to go get it. And they know where it is and it's at their level. The
Right.
things, obviously my scissors and stuff on the top part of the change table when you change the baby. But all that stuff is my teacher stuff. Everything else they can come and get and
Yeah.
do it.
See, I love it. I love it. And you know, you didn't read about that, you came up with that on your own. That's awesome. Those are the best things. I encourage people to visit each other's classrooms because you get so many ideas from different teachers. Again, it's this idea of using the family's experience and knowledge, right? In your Transitional Kindergarten Implementation Guide, they had this fabulous quote that I love. Does the environment reflect the culture, traditions, history, and identity of the children, families, and teachers in the community? Does it? So sometimes teachers are so worried about jumping into the content of either the foundations or the standards that they forget to pause and get to know their families, to know what countries they come from, what's important to them, what are their learning goals for their children. Do you want your children to grow up bilingually? Do you not? How can I support you? So that first sort of building relationship with families and really understanding. Because even when we are well-meaning, we might make serious mistakes when we are trying to honor the families if we don't know enough about them. I got a call 2 weeks ago from a colleague in Atlanta who was so proud that she threw a carnival party for her Brazilian family. And then she said, guess what, Eliana, they were Jehovah Witnesses. They do not celebrate. I was so embarrassed. And I said, next time, you got to ask. Not all Brazilians celebrate Carnival. So it's really important not to have those stereotypes and to really build that rapport with the family, to know how your environment can reflect them. So I have colleagues who ask families, can you bring something that is really special to your culture? And they don't give it to the children to play. They create a little family museum, and then families get to talk about it. Or if they want to put it in the Play-Doh area or create invitations with it, you can explain also something from your culture that the children can play with. So that might be a way to get that representation in your classroom. Here's an example of us in the mission. This is something we offer the children all the time, is the real traditional tortilla makers. And what are some of the skills that you can think children might be learning when they make their own tortillas?
Fine and gross motor skills.
Fine and gross motor skills. Measurement, math. What else? Science.
Engineering.
Literacy.
Engineering.
Engineering. This is technology. When we use the words technology, sometimes people think of a phone, of an iPad, which there's plenty of research saying that it's really, if not used carefully, offering technology too early might not be a very good idea. But we need to broaden this idea that this is the kind of technology children should be playing with, right? So that's something that we offer a lot in the mission, because it's part of the kids' cultures. They are so excited to use that machine, and they love to eat it. So. Little things like contributions from families. This is a little bench that was made by one of the parents. And this little couch was made by one of the grandmas in the program. And they feel so proud, right, to contribute. I have a great, what time is it, Hattie? How are we doing on time? We have 15 minutes left. Okay, so I'm going to skip through this. We're going to also talk a little bit about being intentional about your displays. Because again, we get so excited, we think we have to put everything up on the walls, and then people end up paying attention to nothing at all. So being intentional, this is an example of a very intentional display I saw the other day. The kids had a child in the classroom who was a signing child. So the teacher made this beautiful display, and then the children made their own books with the things they knew how to sign. Another example of a beautiful display, very simple. This is kind of a little museum that the teacher created with the clay pieces that the children had. See how it elevates the children's work and it attracts attention to it. Using real objects, things that you find in your own community. Using natural materials, right? Things with that are interesting and have multiple textures. Creating natural spaces. Somebody said, my memories of my childhood generally were outdoors, right? I don't know how much access you have to your outdoor space. This was a very simple little thing that we created. Just planters on both sides and this fence material over it, and we planted beans, and the children loved it because it was a quiet space outside that they could go to. Also, this idea of inclusive design, right? How can we be as inclusive as possible? How many of you serve children with identified special needs? What are some of the adaptations that you had to make? Just get a couple of.
Learn how to use an AC device or a communication device.
A communication device.
Visual schedules, personalized visual schedules.
Visual schedules are really helpful to children with special needs. What about physical needs? Special chairs, right. So we have to think about those things. The other notion that we talked a little bit about is if you can't make a big transformation, thinking about small provocations that you can bring. And in Reggio Emilia, they use the word provocation, but in English, the connotation is negative, right? I'm provoking you. So we here in the US use the word invitation, right? So how can we create those small invitations that have those design principles in them so that we can focus the children's attention, right, through the materials? I'm going to skip this part. I'm going to just tell you briefly, do I have 5 more minutes?
Yeah.
3 more minutes?
12 more minutes.
12 more minutes, great. So let me talk to you a little bit about a classroom that had about 50% were in the age group that you work with, and 50% were younger, a little younger, preschool, TK together. I worked in this program for about 4 years in the Canal in Marin County. 100% Spanish-speaking families, 100% subsidized program, a lot of children who were in transitional housing, and when I got there, we had found asbestos in the building, and it was the best thing that ever happened to us because it forced us to move out, and we got a small grant to remove the asbestos and do some other work. So I presented the teachers with these design principles, and they got really excited before we moved back, before we thought about the remodel, okay? So we saw these remarkable changes. I'm not going to read them to you. You can see. And again, it's this idea that we're not doing these things just to make it pretty. We're doing these things, we're applying those principles because we know about children, we know what they need, and we know it has a positive impact on them. So here's the classroom and how it used to be. There was this weird wall here with an office, which basically was a storage space. And it was really all, if I took a picture of all the angles of the classroom, this is what it looked like. Okay? And here's what we did. Okay? Now, some people say, how much money did you guys get? The whole thing was $90,000, which sounds like a lot, but once you remove the asbestos and you paint and you do all this stuff, but we got the rugs in one of those remnant places that sold it to us really cheaply. By the way, even the type of rug can impact your children. Tightly woven wool is the best rug for children because they don't have chemicals. Those are expensive, but if you go to these remnant places and you say, do you have any pieces there that you don't use anymore? They can sell it to you pretty cheaply. We then removed all the primary colors as much as possible. We removed a lot of the plastic. We used real materials. We went through our storage and I found these gorgeous toys that were there since the 1930s. Your basements in your schools, I bet you, are awesome. I love digging through them because there's some cool things that people put aside as, we don't do that anymore, that are really awesome things. Here's what the storage room looked like. And of course, teachers never rotated things because finding anything was a pain. And this is what we did. We labeled everything. We put everything in clear containers. And here's what happened, right? Before, we saw a lot of chaos, a lot of unfocused play, not sustained play, rarely supported by adults because adults were putting out fires everywhere. They didn't have time to sit down and actually interact. Little opportunity for small group play. And then after those changes, we saw that the children were much more peaceful, much more focused. There was much more sustained, long play. And adults had more time to interact with the children and to work with them on the things that really mattered. And more opportunity for alone time and small group play. So we did some changes on the schedule too. When we talk about environments, we talk about the physical space, but we also talk about the psychological space. So how you pace your activities, your schedule. If you're moving from one activity to the next, it's really hard for children to focus for a long period of time. So really looking at both the physical space and the psychological space for the children. Oh, I feel like Britney Spears now. Okay, so things like this, it started to happen more and more. Kids having more focus and choosing activities that actually helped them achieve more school readiness. And things like this, really focused play, alone time, things like this. And this. And then a lot more cooperative play. I want to end by having you ask some questions or give me some comments in some of the images that you saw, but also discussing those design principles and figuring out what are some ideas that you are going to go home with? What resonated for you, if a small thing even resonated with you?
You mentioned about placement of things and how simple it can be just to start with one thing. And I have some colleagues that are very linear on their walls. All the children have all these nice little rectangles up on the wall with their work on it. Well, we did a unit on caterpillars and butterflies, and we had caterpillars in a room. We had a butterfly release at our school, and we did butterflies for an artwork. And so instead of having 24 nice little butterflies plastered on the wall, they went home one night, and that evening I put the butterflies starting as a group over there, and then they're flying out toward the door. And we had read a story called Gotta Go, and it's about a little caterpillar doesn't know what he has to do with his life, and he becomes a caterpillar, and then he has to go somewhere, but he doesn't know where he's got to go, and it keeps going, gotta go, I gotta go to Mexico. And so when the kids came in that next day, the little boy says, Mrs. Wren, look, the butterflies, they gotta go to Mexico. And it was just that one small little thing that brought the whole day before together, which was really cute. And it was just one small thing.
But that's where the gold is, right? The gold is in the small things that we can do that we have control over. We're told so many things. We have to do this. We have to follow that. We have to implement this. How many of you have to do DRDPs as well? So there's so many requirements for you out there. But we have power. We can use our power in those small things and really support children's learning. Any more comments or an idea that you're going to go home with?
I just wonder if you have a cheap source of nice baskets.
If I give you my secret, will you go and get all my baskets? I find really awesome baskets in secondhand stores, Goodwill, places like that. But the place where I find the most, and I made friends with folks there, and they know I want baskets, is Scrap in San Francisco. Do you know where that is? But if you don't live in that area, you got to find your own little sources. I find that a lot of people have baskets in their garages that they forget about. So here's how obsessed I am with these things. My neighbors know that I collect some of these things. So I come home sometimes, and on my porch, there will be like 7 baskets or something. And I give them the list of the things I want. You know, I don't let them drop off just anything. So seriously, I go natural things, baskets, they can't be colorful. And so those are some suggestions. Yeah. In the back of Margie's and Deb's book, there's also a list of a number of resources and ideas for you. Any other question? Practical or inspirational? No? Did you have a question?
I was thinking about when you say you do these, you do these trips abroad. Yeah. I heard about this place, Angie, in China, Angie Play. So if you ever do one of those risk, enjoying kind of play tours, I'd like to go with you.
Has anybody heard of this place, Angie Play? Oh my gosh, go online and take a look. Angie Play. It's a place in China. It's and actually the woman who is the leader of that movement came to Mills College, and she is so inspirational. She never really studied Western principles, Montessori, Carolyn Pratt, Froebel, all those people that we study in school. And yet she came up with some pretty similar ideas, except even more interesting, because she uses local materials and recycled stuff in a way that is fantastic. And the trust in children and the trust in the image of the children as confident and competent beings, as people who know how to take measured risks or manage their own risks, is amazing. So the videos are there for you to see. Any more questions or comments? No? I want to attract your attention to Loris Malaguzzi, who is the founder, kind of one of the educators of Reggio Emilia that started the whole Reggio Emilia movement. And he has a wonderful quote. I probably won't say it word by word, but I want to leave you with that thought. It's that the environment is like an aquarium, reflecting the values and the ideas and the philosophy of the people in it. So if you think of your own environment as an aquarium that is going to reflect how you feel about the children, how you think about them as learners, what goals you have for them, you're going to find the inspiration also to provide them with really wonderful environments to learn and grow.